I want to give a big thank you to all my patrons, and I'll be doing a Kingsguard roll call after today's video. Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and today we're going to be doing a no-spoiler review and thoughts for Kings of Paradise by Richard Nell, book 1 of the Ash and Sand trilogy. This is a dark fantasy that is self-published and was one of the picks that my Patreons gave me a few months back. A lot of people seem to think that I like dark fantasy, and I guess I do. I guess that I do tend to lean into that a good bit, but it doesn't mean that I like every single thing I read, and I'm certainly not someone who is just going to heap praise just because of a grueling, gruesome world and gritty characters. There's got to be a lot of substance to this, and people said that there was a very remarkable character in this book, one of the all-time greats possibly, and I would say that I totally agree that this character is remarkable and very memorable, and there are parts of this book that I absolutely adored, and I could see why a lot of people recommended it to me. However, I did feel like the experience came off a little bit lopsided because of the other characters and POVs and overall just some of the tropes that were used here. Not that the tropes were bad, but I didn't feel like they did anything special with those tropes. And when you have a character that stands out as much as Ruka does, which is the character I'm going to talk about in detail here in a minute, you start to think, okay, this author is going to do a lot with everything. But I felt like the light was shining bright on Ruka, where everything else was just kind of okay and didn't really test the bounds of what we read in fantasy. And if that's coming off super pessimistic or negative, I don't intend for it to be. I can't really say enough about Ruka as a character. And also the way that this book ends really sets up book 2 in a great way. But it's not that typical book 1 where nothing happens. I would never say that. You're seeing a legend build. You're seeing survival within these pages that is as gritty as anything else. And I like the fact that there are a ton of different angles in this book. And there's different lands. We have Askham, which is where Ruka is. It's snowy covered mountains, and he's kind of just trying to survive out there in the wilderness, and it's really rough. And then you, of course, have Kale and some other characters that are based more in the mainland of Shere Khan. So these are kind of like two separate kingdoms, and they're not really related, but of course there's always going to be convergence when it comes to big scoped fantasy, and we start to see that happen here in book 1. I will go over kind of the characters and how I found them and what led it to ended up feeling a little bit of a lopsided read for me, and I'll start with the main positive, which is Ruka. The book describes Ruka on the back as a deformed genius plots vengeance while struggling to survive. So he's a survivor. You know, he's considered a monster by the people around him, and he's also a genius bent on vengeance. And oh my goodness, is he a vehicle to explore violence, humanity, also society and culture, and how do you deconstruct that, and what does it look like when someone does not fit the mold? And Ruka is very captivating. I would probably label Ruka as someone who is a genius, but maybe also a little bit sociopathic. And right from the get-go, I'm overanalyzing every single interaction that this character has with everyone around him, because that's not something that you see usually every day, right? So seeing him interact with other people and then also learning about the culture that is around him is really fascinating to see it through that lens. You know what I mean? So yeah, Ruka is an instant hook in this book. Ruka has this prophecy over him that he is a divine child sent to kind of reset everything, tear everything down. And he has a very traumatic event that sends him down a dark, dark spiral, as you can already imagine. And it begins to weigh on the reader whether or not Ruka is self-fulfilling this prophecy or if he really is divine in some way. But one thing becomes very clear from the get-go is that Ruka is about his vengeance. He is about that life. He is going to make people pay for the pain that they have caused him. And he is sympathetic because some of the things that happen to him are really, really cruel. But he goes down some dark paths, and that spiral doesn't get any brighter as we travel with Ruka, and his legend begins to build. Whether or not one way or the other, whether the prophecy is true or not, it seems like it's going to be fulfilled, and that he is really going to try to reset this world and to tear it down. And a huge piece of him trying to survive is the awful things that he has to do. So Ruka creates this almost area in his mind. This is probably the trippiest part of this book and probably one of my favorite things about it. And I'm not sure if I have a full grasp on exactly what's going on when I read this. Like, I had to read it multiple times. But there's a place called the Grove that is within Ruka's mind. And this is where he goes to escape. This is his mental escape. And the weird thing about this, and this is what's trippy, is the fact that I thought it was purely in his mind, but then sometimes things happen in the Grove that actually end up happening in real life. And there's real consequences to it. Like, for instance, there's this part where he has this very expensive item. It's a book, and he thinks about burning it in his grove, and then it turns out like he really is burning it, and he really did burn it. So with all of this, like, it's almost like a hallucination for Ruka. But what it is it's a mechanism for him to file away some of the very terrible things that he has to do to get by. And also, anybody that happens across his path to perishes also ends up showing up in his grove. So there are just dead people all around him. Very wicked imagery. Ruka's fundamental belief about the world seems to stem maybe from what he was taught, but also just what he experiences and the laws of the land. And he believes that laws and rules are only meaningful if there is strength behind it. Or in this case, really what that means is violence. Ruka believes that when everything is thrown aside and you peel back all of the superficial layers, really that comes down to it is can I enforce these rules? Can I enforce these laws? Can I hurt you? And he intends to burn that to the ground. So you can see, we have a prophecy. We're not sure if it's self-fulfilling or not. Also, just the fact that he's kind of a sociopathic genius. Pretty cool. And then you throw on this mindset and this philosophy that he has with the vengeance plot. And you have one of the more compelling characters that I've read this year, really that I've read in fantasy. A lot of people have related him to Kellis from the Prince of Nothing series, if you have read that. I don't think he quite reaches that, but it's not really fair to judge that because I've only read one book of Ruka, whereas with Kellis, I've been with him over thousands of pages. So I'll be curious to see how he stacks up there. But regardless of any comparisons to any other characters in the genre, I do think that Ruka is one that jumps off the page and could hook you immediately, and without a doubt is the brightest point of creativity, imagination, and also execution in Kings of Paradise. So all this is taking place over on Azcom with Ruka, but then when we jump back into Shirkan, which is like this main plot of land and different climate, there's a whole nother thing going on over there, and we have a Sorcerer King, which who doesn't love that? And we're following the fourth born son, I believe, so he's way down in the succession line, and that is Kale. And Kale is a vegan. I'm just kidding. He's not vegan. His name's just Kale.
Oh my God, what a horrible joke.
Okay, well, do you have any better jokes?
Well, actually, I do.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay, knock knock.
Who's there? I love these.
You're
All right, you're a who?
You're a dumb bastard.
So yeah, Kale is over in the white sand paradise that is Shirkan, and being so down low in the succession line, he is serving in the military with lowborn Marines and is having to really make a name for himself and prove that he is the man that his dad wants him to be. There's a strained relationship there and all of that. And I like Kale because I feel like his lack of self-confidence and his anxiety comes through really well on the page. He's not as good as Ruka. It's hard to be, but I also just felt like Kale at times really made the plot drag for me. And I wasn't nearly as interested in a Sorcerer King Paradise Island as I thought I would be. And this is where the lopsided, like I said, this is where the lopsided experience comes in, because when you have someone as compelling as Ruka going on over here, it's really hard to be invested in Kale. And Kale's introduction is actually great. It sets up a lot of the structure for this kingdom and his family and just this whole different area of the world. So I have to say it does a wonderful job of establishing different cultures and rulers. And he was very informative. He came across really well in natural conversation to get that stuff over to the reader. But then towards the middle, that's where it kind of fell apart for me. I don't think it's necessarily bad characterization. It just wasn't nearly as fun to read about as Ruka. So it's kind of a subjective thing. I wanted a lot more from him serving in the Marines, and I like military fantasy. I'm a big fan of Malazan, and I'm getting into Black Company, and that's something I've been craving lately anyway. So I was really gung-ho to get some of these chapters with him, with the Lowborn Marines. But the way that one of his relationships kind of goes, and then his time spent with the Marines, none of it stood out to me. It felt pretty one note and not something that can hold up against what we got with Ruka. And yeah, I know I'm comparing a lot, and can't you just enjoy it in its isolation? No, I can't, because that's how good Ruka is. So Kale's anxiety and stuff, I mean, that's nice, and the characterization's good. The conversation's great. So like the writing is still strong in these POVs. didn't do much for me until the end of the book. And by the end of the book, I did start to like Kale a lot because he started to make decisions. He stopped being such a passive character and really took hold of his situation, for better or for worse for himself as a character. But it was entertaining to watch at least. We also have Dala, who is another POV, and she's extremely pious. And the reason why she is so pious, at least to me it seems, is that her backstory is extremely tragic. Out of everyone in this world, no one has it great. Even the Sorcerer King's son doesn't have it exactly the best. Goes through some pretty tough stuff. And I actually would like to just kind of backtrack just a second and just say that one of the best pieces of the Kale POV that I did enjoy is that even though he was nobility, I felt like he also had the brunt of all of the punishment that this world offers, which makes it feel a lot more consistent, and that the slope is very slippery. And if you fall down into the ranks of someone who is seen as lowly, you're going to have a bad time. This world is absolutely brutal. But getting back to Dala, her backstory is super tragic, and she faces some of the worst stuff in the book, if I'm being honest. And because of that, she starts finding meaning in her religion. She tries to find purpose in her suffering, in her trauma. And what else can someone do than to assign meaning to senseless pain that they're put through as a human? Like, how do you not continue? That's the only way you can continue, rather. Stephen Erickson, that's kind of a quote from Malazan, but that has resonated with me a lot. And I think that Richard Nell does a pretty good job here with Dala to inspect a lot of this. But Dala is a great character and plays a big role in the how should I say this? The story that's being leaked out through this world. And there are other characters and such, but those are the three that really resonate with me, which are Ruka, Kale, and Dala. And they kind of made up the meat of this first book. And it is a good cast of characters, no doubt. Ruka pulls this from being just an average fantasy book to a really good one, and maybe even great. And Ruka is the backbone of this book. I almost wish that the whole thing was from Ruka's POV, but we wouldn't have gotten the interesting, expansive world. And Dala also is very, very important when it plays into the faith and piety of this world. So they all have a role to play, and I do think it's a great cast of characters. When it came to like the overall experience of like flipping these pages and the pacing of it, pacing is a hard thing to talk about, but I did feel like it was a little bit odd because of the way the chapters were grouped. Also, my varying enjoyment of those POVs did play into that, but it does set up book 2 to be something that you really want to get to as quick as possible, honestly. So I got to say, even though there were some pieces in the middle that maybe I felt like could have been fleshed out and maybe a little smoother, overall, this package is well worth your time. Only other thing that really bothered me about this book is there's an extremely long and detailed sex scene. I think there's actually multiple ones. And I don't know how I feel about it. I'm not a prude. I don't think that sex should never be pen to page. Always cut to black. I don't buy into that. I think people can do whatever they want with their books, and some people enjoy these kind of scenes. But for me, it didn't do much. It didn't do much for the book. It didn't do much for the characters. And overall, I thought it was like very graphic, which this world is. Like everything about this book is pretty graphic. But when it came to this, I just didn't. I don't know. It went on really long. Like I think it was like 2 or 3 pages, and I was just kind of done with it by the time that it wrapped up and everyone got what they wanted out of it. I was kind of over it. So if you're sensitive to very long, detailed, gruesome sex scenes, maybe this would be something that you would want to avoid or maybe skim read that part. It didn't do a ton for me. And this is coming from someone that is not prudish, really, when it comes to these things. So at the end of the day, the story is about 2 people, really with Kale and Ruka, that want to change the world. But their methods and philosophy around that goal and that objective is very, very different. And I think that their methods are going to vary wildly in the next 2 books of this series. And I expect things to come to a head in book 2 and book 3. And I'm excited to see how these characters morph, because even within these first few 100 pages of book 1, Ruka's interesting from the start. Kale gets his way there, but they do change a lot. And that character progression in a book 1 is something that is really landmark in getting me to continue a series. So I will be continuing with Ash and Sand Trilogy. It's somewhere probably in the B tier of priorities right now. Maybe I'll get to it earlier in 2023. I'm not sure. But this is one I would recommend to you. If you like dark fantasy, if you like getting in a character's head that maybe thinks a little bit differently than you, I hope a lot differently than you, Ruka is one that even if you don't end up enjoying the book, I think you'll walk away remembering Ruka, maybe for the rest of your life, because I certainly will. So I hope you'll give it a shot and let me know down in the comments what you think about it. If you do, come back to this video and let me know. If you've already read this book, let me know. Books 2 and 3, big step up. Where am I going with this in Ash and Sand trilogy? I'm very, very curious. If you like this video, you can hit like. If you dislike, you can hit dislike. If you love it, think about subscribing. I have all kinds of bookish content here on the channel, and I would love to have you. There's a Patreon in the description. It's optional, but always appreciated. Until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page. And a big thank you to all my patrons, especially my Kingsguard, which include Lauren, Henrik, Kai, Simon, Oscar, Stewart, Stephen R., Akaika, Amanda, RJ Shaw, Nicoletta Tanner, Jennifer Garrick, Frank C., Evie Fever J., Sarah Pat, Kevin Ryan, Michael Terrence, Wade, Darren, Taylor D., Derry, John C., Boss, Machin, Sebastian, Benjamin, Jobot, Noel, Amanda L., Kyle, C. Scott, Steve Talks Books, and Caitlin. Thank you all so much. You're the best.